Prapathakas 2 of the Chandogya Upanishad, translated by F. Max Müller. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jothi Tharavant. The Chandogya Upanishad, Second Prapataka, First Khanda. Meditation on the whole of the Saman is good, and people, when anything is good, say it is Saman. When it is not good, it is not Saman. Thus they also say, he approached him with Saman, that is, becomingly, and he approached him without Saman, that is, unbecomingly. And they also say, truly this is Saman for us, that is, it is good for us when it is good, and truly that is not Saman for us, that is, it is not good for us when it is not good. If anyone knowing this meditates on the Saman as good, depend upon it, all good qualities will approach quickly, aye, they will become his own. Second Khanda. Let a man meditate on the fivefold Saman as the five worlds. The Hinkara is the earth, the Prastava the fire, the Udgita the sky, the Pratihara the sun, the Nidhana heaven, so in an ascending line. In a descending line, the Hinkara is heaven, the Prastava the sun, the Udgita the sky, the Pratihara the fire, the Nidhana the earth. The worlds in an ascending and in a descending line belong to him who, knowing this, meditates on the fivefold Saman as the worlds. Third Khanda. Let a man meditate on the fivefold Saman as rain. The Hinkara is wind that brings the rain. The Prastava is, the cloud is come. The Udgita is, it rains. The Pratihara, it flashes, it thunders. The Nidhana is, it stops. There is rain for him, and he brings rain for others, who, thus knowing, meditates on the fivefold Saman as rain. Fourth Khanda. Let a man meditate on the fivefold Saman in all waters. When the clouds gather, that is the Hinkara. When it rains, that is the Prastava. That which flows in the east, that is the Udgita. That which flows in the west, that is the Pratihara. The sea is the Nidhana. He does not die in water, nay, he is rich in water, who, knowing this, meditates on the fivefold Saman as all waters. Fifth Khanda. Let a man meditate on the fivefold Saman as the seasons. The Hinkara is spring, the Prastava summer, harvest of Yava, etc. The Udgita the rainy season, the Pratihara autumn, the Nidhana winter. The seasons belong to him, nay, he is always in season, successful, who, knowing this, meditates on the fivefold Saman as the seasons. Sixth Khanda. Let a man meditate on the fivefold Saman in animals. The Hinkara is goats, the Prastava sheep, the Udgita cows, the Pratihara horses, the Nidhana man. Animals belong to him, nay, he is rich in animals, who, knowing this, meditates on the fivefold Saman as animals. Seventh Khanda. Let a man meditate on the fivefold Saman, which is greater than great, as the pranas, senses. The Hinkara is smell, nose, the Prastava, speech, tongue, the Udgita, sight, eye, the Pratihara, hearing, ear, the Nidhana, mind. These are one greater than the other. What is greater than great belongs to him, nay, he conquers the worlds which are greater than great, who, knowing this, meditates on the fivefold Saman, which is greater than great, as the pranas, senses. 8th Kanda. Next, for the sevenfold Saman. Let a man meditate on the sevenfold Saman in speech. Whenever there is in speech the syllable hun, that is hinkara. Pra is the prastava. A is the adi, the first one, that is om. Ud is the udgita. Pra the pratihara. Upa the upadrava. Ni the nidhana. Speech yields the milk, which is the milk of speech itself. To him who, knowing this, meditates on the sevenfold Saman in speech, he becomes rich in food and able to eat food. 9th Kanda. Let a man meditate on the sevenfold Saman as the sun. The sun is Saman because he is always the same, Sama. He is Saman because he is the same. Everybody thinking he looks towards me, he looks towards me. Let him know that all beings are dependent on him, the sun. What he is before his rising, that is the hinkara. On it animals are dependent. Therefore, animals say hin before sunrise, for they share the hinkara of that Saman, the sun. What he is when first risen, that is the prastava. On it men are dependent. Therefore, men love praise, prastuti, and celebrity, for they share the prastava of that Saman. What he is at the time of the Sangava, that is the Adi, the first, the Om. On it birds are dependent. Therefore, birds fly about in the sky without support, holding themselves, for they share the Adi, the Om of that Saman. What he is just at noon, that is the Udgita. On it the Devas are dependent, because they are brilliant. Therefore, they are the best of all the descendants of Prajapati, for they share the Udgita of that Saman. What he is after midday and before afternoon, that is the Pratihara. On it all germs are dependent. Therefore these, having been conceived, Pratihrita, do not fall, for they share the Pratihara of that Saman. What he is after the afternoon and before sunset, that is the Upadrava. On it the animals of the forest are dependent. Therefore, when they see a man, they run, Upadravanti, to the forest as a safe hiding place, for they share the Upadrava of that Saman. What he is when he first sets, that is the Nidhana. On it the fathers are dependent. Therefore, they put them down, Nidahati, for they share the Nidhana of that Saman. Thus, a man meditates on the sevenfold Saman as the sun. 10th Kanda. Next, let a man meditate on the sevenfold Saman, which is uniform in itself and leads beyond death. The word Hinkara has 3 syllables. The word Prastava has 3 syllables. That is equal, Sama. The word Adi, first Om, has 2 syllables. The word Pratihara has 4 syllables. Taking 1 syllable from that Ova, that is equal, Sama. The word Udgita has 3 syllables. The word Upadrava has 4 syllables. With 3 and 3 syllables, it should be equal. 1 syllable being left over, it becomes trisyllabic. Hence, it is equal. The word Nidhana has 3 syllables. Therefore, it is equal. These make 22 syllables. With 21 syllables, a man reaches the sun and death, for the sun is the 21st from here. With the 22nd, he conquers what is beyond the sun, that is blessedness, that is freedom from grief. He obtains here the victory over the sun, death, and there is a higher victory than the victory over the sun for him, who, knowing this, meditates on the 7-fold Saman as uniform in itself, which leads beyond death. Which leads beyond death. 11th Khanda. The Hinkara is mind, the Prastava speech, the Udgita sight, the Pratihara hearing, the Nidhana breath. That is the Gayatra Saman as interwoven in the 5 pranas. He who thus knows the Gayatra interwoven in the pranas keeps his senses, reaches the full life. He lives long, becomes great with children and cattle, great by fame. The rule of him who thus meditates on the Gayatra is, be not high-minded. 12th Khanda. The Hinkara is, he rubs the fire stick. The Prastava, smoke rises. The Udgita, it burns. The Pratihara, there are glowing coals. The Nidhana, it goes down. The Nidhana, it is gone out. This is the Rathantra Saman, as interwoven in fire. He who knows thus, knows this Rathantra interwoven in fire, becomes radiant and strong. He reaches the full life. He lives long, becomes great with children and cattle, great by fame. The rule is, do not rinse the mouth or spit before the fire. 13th Khanda. Next follows the Vamadevya as interwoven in generation. 14th Khanda. Rising, the sun is the Hinkara. Risen, he is the Prastava. At noon, he is the Udgita. In the afternoon, he is the Pratihara. Setting, he is the Nidhana. That is the Brihat Saman as interwoven in the sun. He who thus knows the Brihat as interwoven in the sun becomes refulgent and strong. He reaches the full life. He lives long, becomes great with children and cattle, great by fame. His rule is, never complain of the heat of the sun. 15th Khanda. The mists gather, that is the Hinkara. The cloud has risen, that is the Prastava. It rains, that is the Udgita. It flashes and thunders, that is the Pratihara. It stops, that is the Nidhana. That is the Vayurupa Saman, as interwoven in Parjanya, the god of rain. He who thus knows the Vayurupa as interwoven in Parjanya obtains all kinds of cattle, Virupa. He reaches the full life, he lives long, becomes great with children and cattle, great by fame. His rule is, never complain of the rain. 16th Khanda. The Hinkara is spring, the Prastava summer, the Udgita the rainy season, the Pratihara autumn, the Nidhana winter. That is the Vairaja Saman, as interwoven in the seasons. He who thus knows the Vairaja as interwoven in the seasons shines Virajati through children, cattle, and glory of countenance. He reaches the full life. He lives long, becomes great with children and cattle, great by fame. His rule is never complain of the seasons. 17th Khanda. The Hinkara is the earth, the Prastava the sky, the Udgita heaven, the Pratihara the regions, the Nidhana the sea. These are the Sakvari Samans, as interwoven in the worlds. He who thus knows the Sakvaris as interwoven in the worlds becomes possessed of the worlds. He reaches the full life. He lives long, becomes great with children and cattle, great by fame. His rule is never complain of the worlds. 18th Khanda. The Hinkara is goats, the Prastava sheep, the Udgita cows, the Pratihara horses, the Nidhana man. These are the Revati Samans as interwoven in animals. He who thus knows these Revatis as interwoven in animals becomes rich in animals. He reaches the full life. He lives long, becomes great with children and cattle, great by fame. His rule is never complain of animals. 19th Khanda. The Hinkara is hair, the Prastava skin, the Udgita flesh, the Pratihara bone, the Nidhana marrow. This is the Yajana Yajiniya Saman, as interwoven in the members of the body. He who thus knows this Yajana Yajiniya as interwoven in the members of the body becomes possessed of strong limbs. He is not crippled in any limb. He reaches the full life. He lives long, becomes great with children and cattle, great by fame. His rule is, do not eat marrow for a year, or do not eat marrow at all. 20th Khanda. The Hinkara is fire, the Prastava air, the Udgita the sun, the Pratihara the stars, the Nidhana the moon. That is the Rajana Saman as interwoven in the deities. He who thus knows the Rajana as interwoven in the deities obtains the same world, the same happiness, the same company as the gods. He reaches the full life. He lives long, becomes great with children and cattle, great by fame. His rule is, do not speak evil of the Brahmanas. 21st Khanda. The Hinkara is the threefold knowledge, the Prastava, these three worlds, the Udgita, Agni, fire, Vayu, air, and Aditya, sun, the Pratihara, the stars, the birds and the rays, the Nidhana, the serpents, Gandharvas and fathers. That is the Saman as interwoven in everything. He who thus knows this Saman as interwoven in everything, he becomes everything. And thus it is said in the following verse, there are the fivefold three, the three kinds of sacrificial knowledge, the three worlds, etc., in their fivefold form, that is, as identified with the Hinkara, the Prastava, etc., and the other forms of the Saman. Greater than these, there is nothing else besides. He who knows this knows everything. All regions offer him gifts. His rule is, let him meditate on the Saman, knowing that he is everything. That he is everything. 22nd Khanda. The Udgita, of which a poet said, I choose the deep-sounding note of the salmon as good for cattle, belongs to Agni. The indefinite note belongs to Prajapati, the definite note to Soma, the soft and smooth note to Vayu, the smooth and strong note to Indra, the heron-like note to Brihaspati, the dull note to Varuna. Let a man cultivate all of this, avoiding, however, that of Varuna. Let a man sing, wishing to obtain by his song immortality for the Devas. May I obtain by my song oblations, Swadha, for the fathers, hope for men, fodder and water for animals, heaven for the sacrificer, food for myself. Thus reflecting on these in his mind, let a man, Udgatri priest, sing praises, without making mistakes in pronunciation, etc. All vowels, Swara, belong to Indira, all sibilants, Ushman, to Prajapati, all consonants, Sparsa, to Mrityu, death. If somebody should reprove him for his vowels, let him say, I went to Indra as my refuge when pronouncing my vowels. He will answer thee. And if somebody should reprove him for his sibilants, let him say, I went to Prajapati as my refuge. He will smash thee. And if somebody should reprove him for his consonants, let him say, I went to Mrityu as my refuge. He will reduce thee to ashes. All vowels are to be pronounced with voice, Gosha, and strength, Bala, so that the Udgatri may give strength to Indra. All sibilants are to be pronounced neither as if swallowed, Agrasta, nor as if thrown out, Nirasta, but well opened, Vivrita, so that the Udgatri may give himself to Prajapati. All consonants are to be pronounced slowly and without crowding them together, so that the Udgatri may withdraw himself from Mrityu. 23rd Khanda. There are 3 branches of the law. Sacrifice, study and charity are the first, austerity the second, and to dwell as a brahmacharin in the house of a tutor, always mortifying the body in the house of a tutor, is the third. All these obtain the worlds of the blessed, but the Brahma Samasta alone, he who is firmly grounded in Brahman, obtains immortality. Prajapati brooded on the worlds. From them, thus brooded on, the threefold knowledge, sacrifice, issued forth. He brooded on it, and from it, thus brooded on, issued the 3 syllables, Bhu, Bhuva, Swa. He brooded on them, and from them, thus brooded on, issued the Om. As all leaves are attached to the stalk, so is all speech, all words attached to the Om, Brahman. Om is all this, Om is all this. 24th Khanda. The teachers of Brahman Veda declare, as the Prathasavana, morning oblation, belongs to the Vasus, the Madhyadina Savana, noon libation, to the Rudras, the 3rd Savana, evening libation, to the Adityas, and the Visve Devas. Where then is the world of the sacrificer? He who does not know this, how can he perform the sacrifice? He only who knows should perform it. Before the beginning of the Pratharanuvaka, Martin chant, the sacrificer, sitting down behind the household altar, Grahapatya, and looking towards the north, sings the sermon addressed to the Vasus. Open the door of the world, the earth. Let us see thee, that we may rule on earth. Then he sacrifices, saying, Adoration to Agni, who dwells on the earth, who dwells in the world. Obtain that world for me, the sacrificer. that is the world for the sacrificer. I, the sacrificer, shall go thither when this life is over. Take this, he says in offering the libation. Cast back the bolt. Having said this, he rises. For him, the Vasus fulfill the morning oblation. Before the beginning of the Madhya Dina Savana, at the noon oblation, the sacrificer, sitting down behind the Agnidartha altar and looking towards the north, sings the sermon addressed to the Rudras. Open the door of the world, the sky, let us see thee, that we may rule wide in the sky. Then he sacrifices, saying, Adoration to Vayu air, who dwells in the sky, who dwells in the world, obtain that world for me, the sacrificer. That is the world for the sacrificer. I, the sacrificer, shall go thither when this life is over. Take this, cast back the bolt. Having said this, he rises. For him, the Rudras fulfill the noon oblation. Before the beginning of the third oblation, the sacrificer, sitting down behind the Ahavanya altar and looking towards the north, sings the sermon addressed to the Adityas and Visve Devas. Open the door of the world, the heaven. Let us see thee, that we may rule supreme in heaven. This is addressed to the Adityas. Next, the Sama addressed to the Visve Devas. Open the door of the world, heaven. Let us see thee, that we may rule supreme in heaven. Then he sacrifices, saying, Adoration to the Adityas and to the Visve Devas, who dwell in heaven, who dwell in the world. Obtain that world for me, the sacrificer. That is the world for the sacrificer. I, the sacrificer, shall go thither when this life is over. Take this, cast back the bolt. Having said this, he rises. For him, the Adityas and the Visve Devas fulfilled the third oblation. He who knows this knows the full measure of the sacrifice. Yeah, he knows it. End of Prapathakas 2. Recording by Jothi Tharavant. Prapathakas 2 of the Chandogya Upanishad. Translated by F. Max Müller. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox